Hello and welcome back to Art Laughs with me, Verity Babs. Today I spoke to Jack Chisnall.
I'm Jack. I'm a sort of aspiring writer, comedian type person, but I'm currently doing some studies in theology, which is a sort of side angle.
And you've picked aptly for your new studies an altarpiece for us. Do you want to just introduce that?
Yeah, I'm probably going to hideously mispronounce it, so do jump in. I believe it's by an artist called Grunwald, or we think that's his name. My understanding is we're not actually too sure, but it's from something called the Isenheim altarpiece, and it's a sort of very grisly crucifixion scene that you get sort of on the main sort of front of it. I've actually got one. I don't know if you can sort of see it in the back. I've got sort of not the original, but the sort of.
I've got it here with me tonight.
Here tonight. I've got a little print of it in the back.
Oh wow! So where have you come across this?
Very boringly, a theologian that I like had it above his desk, his work desk. I mean, I don't know what about it sort of gave him good work vibes, but I found it's good as well. To just sort of you want that on your periphery the whole time.
Impending doom at any point. It's not really hang in there, Kitty, is it?
Exactly. Yeah. I heard a good phrase once that you should think about death twice a day. Because once isn't enough and three would be too many. I think that's quite true. And this helps me get to my 2 a day.
So looking at this, like, again, it's not something that I know anything about. Is this interest in like this period of art and this topic long running for you? Like, where is this interest in like studying theology come from?
Oh, this is going to sound a bit, I wonder if this will sound a bit strange, really. I mean, it is a weird thing, isn't it? I don't know if I can ask you what your sort of thoughts were about me picking a crucifixion scene. Were you initially a bit like, that's a bit much or a bit morbid, or?
Well, it's interesting. So when I ask like the comedians to pick a piece, I'm always really interested in what they pick. But with this one, it was really interesting because sometimes people pick a piece where you go, oh, they know about that. Like, this is not something that you would stumble across and be like, oh, I just like this. This is not something, popping up all over the place, and people aren't using this for advertising campaigns. So I was like, well, Jack must actually know something about this, or must know about art, or about this period. My hopes were high, Jack, that you knew some stuff.
Oh well, I mean, it's funny. It's funny you say that it's not used for. You say it's not used for sort of advertising, or it's not used for sort of popular purposes. But what does make me laugh about it is that it is sort of the image behind one of the most successful PR campaigns of all time, right? Is this sort of the weird success of this sort of Jewish cult religion based around that really morbid image somehow takes on. I don't know why it's so. It should be so grisly and offensive. And this one, I know some bits about it. I know that it's probably based on lepers that the artist would have seen, because it's some of the grisly grey skin wounds that the Christ has on it are probably actual signs of leprosy. So it's incredibly sort of torturous and a painful image, but I don't know why. It's just always stuck with me. I mean, I remember being a kid and having a Qui-Gon Jinn action figure. On Easter, they kind of show Jesus films, right? And I was sort of watching it, and I don't know, I was trying to recreate it with blue tack. Is that really weird to confess?
Well, that's really interesting, though. The idea of the crucifixion being like, obviously, it's one of the biggest bits in the book, right? But of all the images that we've really attached ourselves to, obviously, it's like Jesus suffering for our sins and this kind of thing. But most of the time, the pictures we have of crucifixion, Jesus is normally pretty hunky and like completely ripped, and doesn't seem quite comfy. I'm not wishing worse upon him, but it's not this twisted, rotting arm that this Jesus has. I think when you think about religion, you sort of want to think about sort of cleanliness and holiness and whatever. So people don't really want the gore of how absolutely awful it would actually be to be crucified.
I mean, how does it compare with, I don't know if in your art course you looked at sort of other religious art, but is this particularly painful compared to like other examples of crucifixion scenes? Or
it's one of the scenes where you go, do you know what? I really wouldn't want to be crucified. Whereas other ones you're like, there's probably worse ways to go. I mean, for like a very gothic piece like this happening presuming in like Northern Europe, at the time, your Germans and your Dutch do a lot of paintings at this time that are a bit hellish and gruesome. It's like very pointy. I always think of that as, if you can't tell what time a piece was made in, you can tell if it's German and from like the 17th century, because everyone's very pointy and sort of plagued. But yeah, I think they go through a thing, and it's potentially in line with sort of religious peaks and troughs of what kind of religion's happening there, in terms of very dour, burn in hell kind of Christianity, versus when things become a bit more like thinking about the Lord as our shepherd, rather than it all being like about hell and this kind of thing. So I guess it probably aligns with that.
I think there's something about, it's probably a very broad brushstroke, but there's something about when I think of like southern Europe, it's like sunny and carnival, and their sort of religion can sometimes be quite sort of festivally and kind of, it's kind of fun and it's colourful. And then I just think of like Scottish or German sort of culture being so shaped by the fact that it's just raining all the time and you're always inside being miserable, and that's why you paint stuff like this.
That's the thing they say about, like, we have Scandi noir and stuff like that, of like very dark, quite like slow paced murders based in Denmark or whatever, but you also have that kind of stuff being produced in Scotland or about Scotland, because they share the same weather, and weather being a super massive influence on that. But thinking about that, looking at the background of this crucifixion scene, I don't think that's what Jerusalem looks like. And that's the thing of looking at paintings from this time in Western Europe. You look in the back of, the nativity scene famously in Bethlehem, and you look in the back and it's medieval Bruges, and it's just finding a way to, people who saw altarpieces, and especially think of like the local peasants, who this would be the most incredible thing they'd ever seen. And like, that's one of the big things of the big pull of the church was, especially pieces that had gold in them. When you held up a candle to that was like mind-blowing. So paintings and stuff like that was a really great way to obviously get people into the church. So people seeing this would be more helpful for them to go, okay, I understand this story, and look, I can understand that that's sort of in a town that looks like my town. Jesus is like a white guy who looks like me, and this kind of thing. It probably makes it easier to access.
Well, do you think that's I was reading an article the other day about like I think the sort of more attention-grabbing headline was, white people have managed to fool themselves that Jesus is white. I think that was provocative, but I sort of understand that, because you look at that and he is a sort of white European. But is that sort of, is it important to contextualize that within like art practice? That people sort of put it in their own idiom, right? A little bit.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting. I think the image of Caucasian Jesus is, like, especially these days, if you think about conservative America, is not put to best practice. It's no longer, we're just trying to help the village people understand. It's more like, not the village people like YMCA. But
they've got to learn.
They get it. They're baptized. But I don't know. I think at these times, I think that, obviously a lot of people who even like were painting then wouldn't even have gone to Italy, let alone to Jordan. So they're probably just doing their best with. It was like when people at this time as well, from the Bible stories, like, okay, I've got to paint a lion, and they've just had to go next door and be like, can I paint your dog? And it's obviously they've never seen a lion, so they've just painted a dog with a headdress on, and they're just making the most of it. It's trying their best. You studied English, and now you've made this change to theology. Is religion a big part of your life?
I've always been fascinated by it, and I've done that from both sides of the fence. So when I was quite little, I sort of had a kind of phase of it when I was a teenager. I think I was drawn to it because I don't know, I was a bit of a weird, dorky kid. And when you're weird and dorky, you just want to push all your chips in and go, right, well, I'll be a Chriso then, I'll be a Christian. And I would sort of use that as a sort of way of probably feeling like a little bit better than people, to be honest. I sort of remember at my sort of school, I don't know if you did this at your school, did they give out Bibles at some point?
They did, yeah.
Yeah, they come round and try and, at sort of state schools in the north, they come round and try and recruit for the army and then give Bibles to the other kids.
Yeah, we had that, yeah.
Send them one way or the other,
Yeah, it's like step one, they didn't take to the army, we've got to deploy step two.
The Bible's in here now. And I remember being very struck by that, and I sort of thought, well, I'll be a very sort of pure Christian type person, and I'll sort of look down on everyone else. And I was sort of quite active at the church, and I would sort of I did lights and sound at church. I was real, like, I had sort of big headphones on. I genuinely used to do the PowerPoints and stuff. It wasn't like it wasn't dry ice or anything. It wasn't sort of
flames.
Then a very typical, boring teenage boy atheist phase. But I don't know. I don't know if where you are with these things. Did you have a sort of atheist phase? Are you an atheist or?
Yeah, I definitely consider myself an atheist. I think the thing is that I grew up in very rural countryside where it was just like the done thing. I went to a C of E primary school and, went to Sunday school on Sundays because that was what one did if you wanted to see your friends and like have some squash. So, and it was a Methodist Sunday school, and the Methodists are very, like, from what I remember, very anti-drinking and quite big on hell, but pretty relaxed about the other stuff. So I feel like I'd spent a lot of time colouring in sort of, like you say, lepers and like burning and stuff like that. So it was pretty gruesome there. But I think that religion is one of those things that's quite attractive to be one or the other. I think there have been times where I probably, like when I was a bit younger, probably toyed with the idea of maybe I'll just do this. Because I guess, again, it's pretty attractive for anyone to have rules by which one lives their life, and knowing that I think faith must be a really wonderful thing to have. And I think having faith is is probably a lovely way to live your life. It's just not something I have. But again, I went through a very aggressive teenage phase of like, anyone who believes in religion is terrible and awful and they've committed war crimes. It's like, no, they haven't. They're just living their lives, So
for me, it was such an intelligence thing. I don't know. It was so like Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins just seemed like they'd solved something very big, and that was very attractive to me in some way.
Yeah, I think it definitely came down to this idea of, but how can you have been bought? How could you bought into this global conspiracy about, keeping the people down by telling them that there's a God? That just means that you're allowed to be kept in poverty or whatever. It was I remember being very passionate about it. It wasn't just like, I haven't got faith, but good for you if you do. It was, I think it felt like a very passionate thing. And that's why when you look at paintings like this as well, like they're going all in on the thing of crucifixion is horrible. Look at how, Mary is weeping, and, it's properly like reminding you of like the grit of it, because this was and, remains the way that so many people completely live their lives.
Yeah, well, I don't know at what point it sort of turned round for me. I guess it was through art a little bit. I was a massive atheist all throughout university, and then left. You find yourself in London trying to make it as a comedian, performer type thing, or whatever you want to be. And maybe it's just that typical boring loneliness or sort of apathy that sort of steps in, but you sort of you want to cling on to something. And it was through sort of art and literature. I thought, well, it's kind of fun to sit in a church, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to a sort of quite posh service, like with like the full-on choir and all that stuff, and the smoke and the incense.
Well, in university, a couple of times I went to church just to have a sing. I love a communal sing, and it's very good for your soul. So yeah, sometimes I do go to a church just to have a look around. I think that's a very aesthetic thing.
Yes.
But yeah, I think there probably is something quite comforting, something very familiar of going to a little rural church and hearing them do the Christmas service they always do, and knowing that this is the bit where the kids come out and do. I feel like the routine of it is quite comforting.
But what I sort of came to feel, and it's why that this painting is sort of a good example for me, at least, is that at the heart of this sometimes quite suburban, well-managed, kind of whitewashed version of religion that we have in this country, and possibly America as well, behind this sort of quite powerful state religion are very sort of dark, weird images, very dark, strange stories, and a lot of pain and misery and suffering. And I just don't know by what sort of mistake it sort of caught on. I mean, you could say, well, Christianity aligned itself very well with power or a sort of global influence. But what was it about, like, I mean, I just imagine being the sort of the first person in the St. Paul in the Mediterranean saying, like, we've got a new guy, he's the sort of answer, he's the truth. And bit of a snag, he was killed, he got crucified immediately and snubbed out by the most powerful empire on the planet right now. I don't know. Maybe it's me. I'm not suggesting all that means it's why it's all true, but I think it needs to be explained away in some way, right? You've got to sort of deal with the fact, why did this work? I mean, I don't know if you've got a feeling about that, or
Yeah, I don't know. I think any idea that is as tenacious as religion, which is, you know, as old as communities have ever been. You know, everyone has had the religion, because I think that's probably a very human thing to be like, what is this all about? And I don't know, maybe it's quite a modern thing of, you know, probably more. I think it's probably fair to say that more people are atheists than ever before, if you think about like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, etc. But then potentially we do have more to fill our time with.
yes, I think a big reason for like the decline of church attendance is that, you know, there's just stuff to do now. You can go to the shops, or you can go and watch the footy. But this all weirdly relates to sort of my comedy stuff, I was about to say, because I don't know, it's weird. There's a weird sort of thing in early Christian discussion about the foolishness of Jesus and the foolishness of being a Christian. Because a lot of the things Jesus does are really strange. Like, you know, you weirdly sort of back a guy who got crucified, or you sort of go around giving your money away, or you do the sort of opposite thing to what you're supposed to do if you're a wise person. And I don't know, there's this sort of whole funny thing about there's something called the holy fool, which I quite sort of like the idea of these sort of early wandering Christians who sort of like, you'd sort of laugh at them, but they would be trying to kind of achieve wisdom through being an idiot, basically. And in my last sort of stand-up shows, I was trying to sort of try this persona out of like, can you try and be so stupid that you accidentally say something quite wise? Try and get that sort of angle on things. So I ended up sort of trying to like talk about the audience as if they were the sort of performer and I was the sort of punter paying to see them, and try to sort of like totally switch things around. But with your comedy, do you find that you need to sort of get a weird angle on things? Is it about being sort of a bit stupid in a way? Is the comedian's job to be a bit dumb in order to make people laugh?
I don't know. I think it's interesting. It's like when I was doing stand-up, it was pretty clown based. Like, it was pretty surreal. I didn't really have any punchlines. It was a lot of like making big props out of paper mache. I think with my comedy, it wasn't really about anything other than being really stupid, because I think it was because I couldn't really be bothered to write proper jokes. You know, the last show I did in Oxford, for 7 minutes of my half an hour set, I sat and ate a cold microwavable lasagna in silence. And that was the kind of thing I did a lot of the time. I feel better about it now that I know that I could be like, oh, it's about the holy fool, it's about wisdom, you know, I'm making a comment about.
It's actually a pretty important art piece that I'm doing here. You might think I'm just eating alone, but in fact, it's this whole thing. Yeah.
It's the Last Supper. Jack, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Could you just let us know where we can follow you and hear what you're up to?
Yeah, you can get me on Twitter at Chisnall_Jack. Or I sometimes do things with a double act called Moon, and we're called Moon Comedy.
Thanks so much for watching. You can follow Jack in the ways written below, and as per usual, you can follow me at VerityBabsArt on Instagram. It'd be amazing if you could share this video and give us a subscribe or a like or a comment, and I will see you next time.